So this is our first mantra after the ending of the winter retreat. I was looking out on the space in the room and missing Jeed and Dave and Max and Alexandra and all the folks who were serving the winter retreat who have started to leave. Still got Paul left. The others are going to be staying on. Noticing transitions in energy too. There have been quite a uptick in the engagement, which was to be expected, natural, part of the flow. And watching the quality of the mind in response to that energy surging and increased amounts of thinking, pondering. And trying to think of some skillful ways to work with that kind of change of energy. The last part of our retreat was, a theme was centered around one who delights in nippapancha, delighting in non-proliferation, non-objectification, the settling of that chain of reactions in the thinking process based on habitual thought, habitual patterns with a strong emphasis on the sense of self. And we talked about lots of strategies and ways of viewing it and working with it to realize less of that process. And also wanted to put in a bit of a plug for skillful thinking, not just in terms of abandoning unskillful thinking, but in terms of producing the skillful kinds of thought. I remember when I was getting into my teenage years, I was reading some literature of some sort or hearing some discussions about meditation and was wondering what meditation was all about, and did some exploration in my more in my late teens, I guess, 17, 18, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. And didn't come across any Buddhist teachings. They didn't seem to be so available at the time. They probably were if I had searched, but I didn't really know the word Buddhism. It seemed like some sort of foreign religion that I didn't really have anything to do, any interest in, but for some reason meditation caught my interest. And I think the first form maybe that I encountered in looking in different kinds of readings was sort of a Judeo-Christian based kind of orientation, and wasn't really clear as to what the goal was, but there was discussion of contemplation and meditation rather than just prayer, and that intrigued me. It may be couched in terms of rather than talking, you'd be listening. The difference between prayer and meditation is that you're listening rather than talking. And that sounded very attractive. But it wasn't clear to me what was I listening to. And it wasn't really described well. Maybe some vague memory of it being described as listening to God, listening to the voice of God, or to the word of God, but just tuning in, quieting down, and listening to God. And at that time, I still had just my from my upbringing in Protestant religion, Protestant church, Presbyterian, still have my very strongly ingrained impression of God as being this old white guy with a long beard sitting in a throne up in a cloud. And so, not knowing any better, that was the visual image that I produced in those early days of meditation. And I think after a while, realized that I wasn't getting any more peaceful. It didn't strike me as something that was a very settling kind of meditation object. And then maybe just sort of doing some of my own investigating and questioning, when I was sitting there with my eyes shut, trying to figure out what I should be doing. I knew that I was supposed to sit there with my eyes shut, and that's what meditation was all about. But it didn't go beyond that, really. But started questioning, like, well, what am I looking for? I'm looking for some sort of peace of mind. Came up as an answer, which was, I think, pretty good. And it was sort of a sequence of questions. And so, well, what's keeping me from having peace of mind? The answer that came up at that time was, this relentless thinking. It's just thinking. It's so exhausting. It's so tiring. I just want to stop thinking. Well, maybe that's the goal of meditation. Because that would probably make my life a whole lot more peaceful if I could just stop thinking. Shut up. So I pursued that in all sorts of unrealistic ways, just trying to obliterate and plot, push it down. And, that kind of strong-arm suppression wasn't doing too much. It just kept on popping back up. But it seemed like there was got to be something to it, so I just kept on pursuing over really years, off and on, and trying to figure out what it was that I was supposed to be doing in meditation. And it wasn't until really, and I kind of struggled and read some more things, and found some literature that was sort of Buddhist related and talked about watching the breath. Okay, well, there's something else to tune into, and mostly at the breath at the tip of the nose, and that even entwined with that instruction, some of the sources I was reading saying, yeah, the goal still is to stop thinking. So you watch your breath in order to quiet the mind so that then you can stop thinking. So that seemed, legit. Tried that, and of course the thinking didn't stop. And it wasn't really until I got much more into this tradition and received some better instruction about the fact that, yes, in later on in meditation, as the skill grows and as the mind settles, thinking may start to settle down, and in some cases, deeper states, the thinking stops. But that making that the primary goal is not what it's all about. So once I finally heard that and got that, sort of the pressure was off, and realized, as we all do, I think, that we have to engage in skillful kinds of thinking, vitaka vichara. We're not trying to annihilate it. We're not trying to just get rid of it, even as annoying as it sometimes can be when it's uncontrolled and under the, it's controlled all right. It's just controlled by the defilements rather than wisdom. But realizing that it's a real strong habitual process, that you're not trying to annihilate in that sense of the word, became more manageable. It was think it was Patimokkha Owada this evening, Ajahn Sek mentioned something about Ajahn Chah being in a situation that he found annoying with a lot of talking going on, and so he experimented with trying to put candle wax in his ears to blot it out, and realizing that that didn't make his mind any quieter, and that was the real disturbance. Which is kind of interesting, because I've just spent the past few hours trying to get wax out of my ears. So, when it's there, you want it out. When it's not there, you want it in. But it's that sense of in the teaching that we've heard before. It's that it's not like you're actually trying to stop thinking. When thoughts come, you don't need to try and annihilate them. If they're unskillful or negative thoughts, a better attitude is just try not to pick them up. So having a bit more of a benign relationship with those distracting, disturbing kinds of thinking. And again, we've talked about that a fair amount in the past several months. But just wanted to put another plug in, because I think probably many people are now starting to experience an upsurge in uncontrolled vitakka, and it's useful to think of what might be a good counter-response, and to really use the power. Thinking is a very powerful process, and to rather than letting it control us, at times getting used to thinking of how we can harness that energy in a skillful way towards a positive end. And it is a process of retraining the cognitive processes, how to recognize as quickly as possible with mindfulness when the mind is moving into that papancha, and to offer alternatives. That's like the kind of the first solution from the teaching on removal of distracting thoughts is to substituting a coarse peg with a finer peg, and substituting a coarse thought with a finer thought. Not as a way of trying to push away or repress the whole process, but as a way of skillfully using the same energy to turn the mood of the mind, the state of the mind, around into something that's pleasant and supportive, and trending towards peace rather than agitation. And there's a lot of different suggestions that the Buddha has about how to retrain that process, and not to try and annihilate the thinking, but to try and use it to our benefit. So one of the classic suttas that most people are familiar with, but I just find it's good to just keep refreshing it over and over again, some of the words from the suttas. And this is where learning some of the English and putting it to memory is a real skillful process, learning some of the English in the teachings so that you have it to pull up into your mind to recite and instruct you, is a very skillful means. That's actually using right thought right from the beginning as an instruction. And the two kinds of thought sutta is kind of your classic introduction to that, where the Buddha divides, before he was enlightened, he divided his thoughts into two categories. Those essentially that were skillful, and those that were unskillful. The unskillful ones being those that led to the suffering of himself and others, and the skillful ones leading to the well-being of himself and the well-being of others. So the first half, of course, of abandoning the unskillful thoughts of sensuality, ill will, and cruelty, but making a point of actually really cultivating those opposites, thoughts of renunciation, simplicity, turning it around so that when the mind is starting to move out into thoughts of sensual desire, to pick up on that and see if there's a mind in there, a way in there of bringing up a sense of contentment with what one has, and a reduction of the need to go there, to go out to the realm of the senses for that happiness, to actually shift the thinking, using a very conscious effort to do that, recognizing that and say, no, don't want to go there, but I do want to go here, not just as a method of trying to get rid of the unwanted thinking and then go back to the breathing, but to actually pause before that, because you can get into a real negative habit of just seeing the obstruction, trying to turn away from it and go back to a very fine neutral object like breathing, and that can become a real habit that can be kind of producing negative mental states, because all you're looking at is obstructive mind states and trying to turn away from them to this very neutral object to try and settle the mind. And that's the range of your emotional experience, from negative to neutral, negative to neutral, negative to neutral, back and forth. So injecting in good quantity some of the positive mind states. So really turning it around and thinking of simplicity, contentment with little, what it's like not to be encumbered, that sense of ease, and really focusing on that. What does that feel like inside? What does it feel like to have a sense of non-ill will, the positive side of it? What does it feel like to have a sense of compassion, non-cruelty? What does it feel like? And to cultivate those mind states, and just to keep doing that, keep turning in that direction. And the Buddha says in that sutta, whatever the mind thinks about and ponders about frequently, or whatever one thinks about and ponders about frequently, that becomes the inclination of the mind. We actually reconfigure the wiring. Not just getting rid of the unskillful and unpleasant, but really configuring some positive states of mind. And he gives a nice simile of that process of comparing the effort that one has to make when dealing with difficult states of mind, or the unskillful thoughts of a cowherd who's watching over the cows and has to be very careful. It's the growing season of the crops around, and he has to be sure that the cows don't go wandering into the fields, or otherwise it would upset the farmers. And so he has to keep a very close eye on these cows so they don't wander. And so it's similar with the negative thoughts. You have to keep a very close eye so that they don't go and cause a lot of damage. But that with the change of season, in the simile, with the change of season and the harvest is in, and there's not much danger out there, then the cowherd can relax and just mindfully keep a half an eye on the cows, but that they're not going to wander around and cause trouble at this time of the year. And so if we have thoughts of simplicity and renunciation, goodwill, compassion, that we don't have to go herding those thoughts. We can just mindfully watch them and be with them. Note their presence, enjoy the presence of that kind of thinking process, but we don't have to guard it and shepherd it carefully. We can relax with a more broad mindfulness. And so that's the mood, the mind state that can result from cultivating these positive states of mind. It leads to a relaxation, a lack of tension in the mind. It's nice to kind of just hang out and watch thoughts of warmth and compassion and, not desiring a whole lot. It's a pleasant state of mind to be with. The mind relaxes, settles, opens, broadens. And this is without even having to watch the breath yet. It's just, this is the result of dwelling with skillful, pleasant thoughts. There's lots of ways to do that, to bring up this skillful thinking process. And I often find in meditation that over and over again, I was just doing it tonight to practice with it, is just reviewing through the 5 hindrances, but in the positive sense. So thinking about, okay, well, is there any sensual desire, sensual craving coming up? But not just in a way of saying, okay, well, get rid of that one so that my mind can settle down, but more like, well, what's the opposite? What would it feel like to be just contented? What is contentment like? Let's put that out as an example. What's the feeling tone of content? Not wanting. It's very settling. And similarly, say with the hindrance of ill will. Well, what's the feeling of non-ill will? What does it feel like? Warmth. Bringing up some words like gentle. Just plugging that in. What's the feeling that comes up when you say to yourself, when you use the word gentle, warm, kind? Just letting the word evoke the feeling. Or the opposite of the third hindrance of dullness and drowsiness, clarity or clear, fresh, alert, just using those words opens up the mind, kind of washes it out. Restlessness, the opposite would be stillness. So just using the word stillness. And the opposite of worry and doubt, well, I guess mostly just doubt, skeptical doubt, being secure is a word that comes to my mind. So just saying those words, not dwelling so much on the hindrance itself, but just going through as a recitation with using vitaka and vichara as positive strengths. Contented, warm, gentle, fresh, alert, still, secure. And just watching to see the effect that it has in the mind. And almost, you can use it almost as a mantra for a little while. I do that sometimes. So you can sense the uplift of the mood of the mind. It settles, it rises up, uh, and it's just through this applied thinking process. Nothing magical about that. Just turning it around. And then that provides the basis for the mind to just settle with breathing. You don't have to go looking after it. You don't have to go pursuing it, trying to tackle it and hold it. But the mind that is filled with contentment, with warmth, gentleness, alertness, clarity, stillness, and security. When that is established, then the breathing just comes and settles with you. This is the Dhammavichaya. This is something the Buddha really encourages and talks about, teaches. One of the factors, one of the seven factors of enlightenment is this investigative, very active. So it really shows that the Buddha really encourages and teaches this active kind of use of thinking, language, conceptual modeling to a very, very good end. It's just that we have to take charge of it rather than letting the defilements take charge of it. We have to let wisdom and mindfulness take charge and direct that thinking. And then the mind naturally settles into a collected state. So yeah, just remembering also Ajahn Chah's comments about, when somebody's asking him, what do I need to do to stop my thinking? And he says, well, it's like there's only really one kind of person who doesn't think anymore. That's a dead man. So that, not even trying to go there, but trying to say, well, how can I turn around this process and use it to my advantage? So just, using some of these basic teachings as reminders through the day, through the meditation process, as the mind starts to get churned up with more increased engagement, activity, things to do, all the office work that's starting to happen, even more so. Some of it was already happening during the retreat for some of us, and for others it's now starting to upswing. Got guests to manage. We have all sorts of paperwork kinds of things that need to be done, lots to consider, lots that take us into the thinking realm, and to make sure to take the time to settle that process. Another one of the teachings is that if the mind seems restless and not able to settle with its object, to think about an inspiring theme. To just use that thought process to think of something inspiring, and then when it's done its work, then one can let it quietly drop. So those kinds of reflections, memorizing of some of the suttas, very, very much recommended in the English so that you can understand it. And just picking that up in a skillful way as a very important and primary means of developing the heart in periods of activity like we're moving into. So just a few practical thoughts for this evening, and I think I'll leave it there for tonight. Okay.